I hadn't seen my friend Damien in many years. Damien and I had been close friends in school and even kept in touch a little while we were in college. But shortly after I graduated from seminary, we drifted apart. There was no dramatic falling out, just the usual sorts of reasons. I pursued a career in ministry in Nebraska, and he got married and moved to central Indiana. Damien was not what you would call an early adopter of social media, so Facebook was not really an option for us to stay connected, but we recently have reconnected. Indeed, it was just in that past year when he moved back to the small town in Michigan where we were from that we saw each other again. So as I said, I hadn't seen Damien for a few years until last summer when I was back home. And we did a lot of the same things that we did when we were in high school. We had dinner together, we browsed through our favorite bookshop, we cruised past parts of the old neighborhood and reminisced. And then he came over to my parents' house and got reacquainted with them and newly acquainted with my children. And after Damien went home, my mom commented, "You guys act just like you did in high school." And she was right. I had the same feeling when we were together, that spending time with my friend of 20 years ago, somehow in those hours, I had the experience of time having gone backwards. It was as if decades had been erased. Now he and I are the same age, and he has a stepson who has a child, so he's a grandfather now. In fact, I never let him forget. But that inner experience of being with him again awoke a kind of younger version of myself that had been dormant for a long time. And it wasn't just how I felt, but it obviously showed through. My mother could see how both of us talked and interacted with each other. I'm sure you've had similar experiences reconnecting with an old friend or perhaps even at a high school reunion. Social psychologists explain this change in behavior and personality by what they call situational influences. I once worked with a woman who was originally from England. And she related to me that once her mother, who still lived in England, came to visit her in Michigan, and they decided to take the bus downtown to go shopping. And for a long time, the bus would not come, and they started to check their watch. Why was the bus not coming? And it appeared to them both that they were standing on the wrong side of the road, the side that the bus would come in England, not America. All it took was one other person from England to create a situational influence. It only takes two people to keep a culture going. So these examples of situational influences on us are pretty benign thus far. However, they can be powerful factors in influencing our behavior. Situational influences can even push us towards ethical decisions that we might not otherwise have made. Perhaps the most vivid example or demonstration of this was the Stanford prison experiment. In the summer of 1974, a group of sophomores at Stanford University were randomly divided into guards and prisoners. And the purpose of this experiment was to see just how does an intelligent, middle-class young man react to confinement and institutionalization. But what it revealed wasn't so much about the prisoners as it was about the guards. That it didn't take long for those with power to denigrate and dehumanize those who did not have power. There was name-calling, physical punishment, humiliation, torment between guards towards the prisoners. In fact, even the researchers doing this study got hooked in and caught up in it all. They'd been so keen on studying the dynamics of what was going on that they failed to recognize the immoral behaviors going on as part of their experiment. It took the girlfriend of the lead researcher to come and point out to them all how unethical this experiment had turned into. And finally, they intervened and stopped it. from beginning to end, situational influences turned a group of Stanford students into Abu Ghraib prisoners in the course of just 2 weeks. The Abu Ghraib reference is intentional because some of the torture done in that experiment replicated itself or was very, very similar to what was done in Abu Ghraib. So much so, in fact, that the lead researcher of the Stanford prison experiment, Philip Zimbardo, was an expert witness at one of the trials of an Abu Ghraib guard. In his book, The Lucifer Effect, Zimbardo does not excuse such behavior. The Abu Ghraib guards were guilty in both the legal and the moral sense. But rather, Zimbardo is interested in these situational influences, how they exert such power over us as to make it so difficult to resist evil. In addition to talking about his experiences with Abu Ghraib, he examines the Salem witch hunts, the 1994 Rwandan genocide, and Adolf Eichmann. And in all these cases, he points out that people perpetuated unimaginable evil because some authority designated a particular group of people, be they Jews or Tutsis or witches, as less than human. That one situational influence, one person saying that group is not human, was all it took for evil to flourish. Well, I think Philip Zimbardo's book, The Lucifer Effect, is probably the most powerful examination of human evil, and he does talk about human heroism too. Probably the most powerful examination since Voltaire and Augustine. I also find it personally challenging, and challenging to our Unitarian Universalist faith. If you were here 2 weeks ago, you may recall that I preached about an old Unitarian theory of salvation called salvation by character. Now, for those of you who may have missed it, I define salvation by character as that idea that we're saved not just by doing good things, but by becoming better people. That there's something within us, an essence, that's transformed into something new and something better in that process. It's a kind of this worldly vision of heaven, with our inner essence transformed into that something that's just a little lower than the angels, then everywhere we walk becomes paradise. It's a lovely 19th century transcendentalist vision of our life. Until Philip Zimbardo comes along and throws cold water all over the whole thing. He asserts that people are not as consistent as they like to think they are. I act very differently around my friend Damien. In that case, a situational influence might not affect my moral choices to the degree it did for Adolf Eichmann, but Zimbardo makes a powerful and dramatic point that our character is shaped by our social situation. Who we associate with has a very real effect on us. We're nurtured by our communities, while at the same time we make them come to life with our presence. Therefore, it becomes vitally important to be around people who have values that exert a positive influence on us. A community asserts its values onto its members. I once heard it framed this way. Someone once said that we become the average of the 5 people we hang around the most. But if you hang around with people who go jogging every morning, you'll probably be 2 people that are better than you, 2 people who are worse, and you'll wind up somewhere in the middle. Now, I don't swear by the exactness of that principle, but it does illustrate the point, right? That social and situational influences shape us, shape our character beyond what we may even realize. And therefore it becomes very, very important to be very intentional about the kinds of communities that we're a part of. Which I suppose, really, is the moral of the story that Kathleen Norris told in our reading this morning. If there was ever on the earth a community of people who were intentional about their values and living them out in their day-to-day behavior, it is the Benedictines. Saint Benedict, in his rule for his community, knew something about the power of situational influences. Our communities shape us at least as much as we shape them. And in her reflection, Norris notes that the community really isn't about some sort of abstract theology and the theories of salvation or communion or what have you. The real teaching comes by living in close quarters with people who demonstrate their faith through their actions. It's in the earthiness of the women who are put together this feast in the community that speaks to her. Their humor, their wisdom, their reactions to the events of life, or how they live out their values, and in turn communicate those values to each other. I believe religious community is different from every other kind of community there is because of the intentionality of living out our values. Our individual character is not locked in. It's dynamic. It's an ever-changing aspect of ourselves. Our character can grow and develop and blossom as the Unitarians envisioned into this kind of salvation by character. But as Snyder points out, the opposite can happen too. Our character can diminish as well. As a church, it's useful to ask ourselves, are we helping people grow in character or do we diminish them? Both are possible. There are lots of churches that demonize and dehumanize gay, lesbian, transgender people in much the same ways Embargo is talking about. The Lucifer effect is alive and well in religious communities and churches as sure as it is in any other social situation. There's a joke among ministers that says, church is a little like nitroglycerin. It can be used to heal your heart, or it can blow up in your face. Now, thankfully, it's not just the Benedictines. We too have a faith that we can, or a heritage and a faith that we can draw on. The Pilgrims, whom we will be celebrating this week, did something unique when they arrived in America. They were part of what was called the Free Church movement, meaning that they were free from the Church of England, and they created a covenant among themselves. This covenant was an explicit statement of their values and how they would live those out. Our unison affirmation, which we repeat every week in our worship services, serves kind of a similar purpose. It names both who we are and the values we aspire to live into. History, of course, tells us that the Pilgrims were imperfect people, to say the least, who were oppressive to the Native Americans and hostile to people who believed differently than they did. But they did start this practice of naming those values, those promises to each other, even if they didn't always live up to their own ideals. Covenants can be powerful, situational influences, to borrow Zimbardo's term. They can set the stage and create a framework for how to understand our relationships. They're not magic guarantees that everyone's going to behave according to those values, but they at least name our aspirations as a sort of touchstone that tells us both who we are and what we wish to become. It's a powerful moment in our worship service to stand here on the chancel and hear the congregation recite that unison affirmation together. It's like we receive a blessing from you up here every week you've spoken. Not long ago, my son Matthew asked his older brother a question. He asked Thomas, "Do you love me?" And Thomas responded with, "No, I don't love you." And he said it in that kind of way, you know, like it was sarcastic or ironic. It's like, man, of course I love you. Why do you keep asking? Which the little one does ask that question a lot. But Matthew didn't understand the subtle meaning of what Thomas was trying to say, and he got very upset. Well, when I heard this exchange going on in the other room, I was aghast. Not really so much by Thomas's behavior, but at the recognition that the level of irony and sarcasm used in that interaction was probably learned by his parents. Sharon and I are of Generation X, and we swim in the ironic. Sarcasm is kind of a second language for my generation. And I realized we had become that situational influence on our children, and not in the way that we meant to be. So, we decided to create, I guess what you call a covenant of sorts. It's an agreement, a promise that each person in the family makes, including mom and dad. And it obviously can't be very complicated, but it says basically that we say nice things to each other in our family. That's it. That's our agreement. That's how we are going to be together. There's a study done among couples. There's actually a study about divorced couples, comparing them to couples that stay together a long time. And one of the things they did in the study was count how many times the couples gave each other compliments. And among couples who reported having a happy marriage decades into their relationship, they complimented each other almost 20 times a day. This turned out to be one of the most compelling factors in the study. 20 compliments a day doesn't happen by accident. That means that those couples intentionally sought out opportunities to compliment the other person. It was such a powerful situational influence. Covenants can work in our families too, not just here at church. Say nice things to each other. It's a simple promise to make, but a powerful commitment to keep. Which is a good thing to remember as we come together this week to feast with our families. Don't get challenged. Not like my new family's coming to say nice things to each other. I'm going to be remembering it this week when I am back home in Michigan. Goodness knows I'll have to resist the temptation to throw one of my mom's crescent rolls across the table with my obnoxious uncle. Yeah, he'll probably be bragging about the Republican victories in the election. I can deal with that, though. It's when he gets going about how his precious Michigan State Spartans beat the tar out of my beloved Wolverines that he's sorely tempted to hurl food at him. Maybe a utensil or two, I don't know. But you see how powerful that situational influence can be, even on us. So join me, won't you, in celebrating Thanksgiving holiday in a renewed spirit, peace, joy, and love. Gratitude, is a lofty aspiration. It's a noble spiritual practice, but some years it takes a lot of effort to get up to gratitude. But let's give it a shot this week. But by remembering our covenants, those promises we make to each other, the road to gratitude can also transform our character. May it be so for you this year. Amen. Blessed be. I invite you now to join in singing. We got to sing it, right? Hymn number 67, we sing now together.